Welcome to the Risk and Repeat podcast, episode number 236. I'm Rob Wright, Security News Director at Tech Target, and I am here with Senior Security News Writer Alex Kalafi. Alex, welcome.
Thanks, Rob.
How are you doing on this sunny, fine Monday?
I'm doing all right. Vegas was Vegas, and I'm glad to be eating vegetables again.
Yes, we are recording this on August 12th, the morning of August 12th. You are back from a few days ago from Black Hat USA 2024 in Las Vegas. What was the weather like? I did not go this year. This is the first year I have not been in some time. You and Ariel were there. Was it like 100 degrees? Was it a little bit warmer or a little bit?
So I think it hovered 100 to 110.
Oh,
It was the hottest temperature I've ever felt in my life,
man.
in the outside world. It was so hot that my eyes could feel the heat, like you were in a really dry, high temperature sauna.
Yeah.
And so, usually at night after I get my articles done, I like to either go out onto the strip or just see the outside world a little bit. And when I went out at 8 or 9 p.m., it still felt like it was like 85, 90. So it was just, it was crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
To be back.
Well, now you're in the Northeast again, so you get the humidity. Although today the weather's not bad.
Very nice.
So
Yeah.
knock on wood. So yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit about Black Hat because I think this year was this is a pretty interesting show. There was some good research, good sessions, some noteworthy speakers, keynotes, etc. And I think it touches on a lot of things that we've covered lately. So let's get into it. You wrote a story that sort of recapped what you had seen across like a day and a half, 2 days of sort of highlighting two primary themes. What were those themes?
So the first theme, which I'll touch on, is AI, which was to be expected. Black Hat, it's kind of a research show, but I'd argue it's more of a trade show. I know it wasn't always that way, but certainly that way now. There's a big trade show component. Of all the vendors on the show floor, large number of them were pitching AI. Maybe a tiny bit quieter on the LLM front, almost as if some folks know that it can be a little corny depending on the way you pitch your AI. And the most common line that I would always hear out of my interviews is like, no one's actually using AI. So maybe with that being the temperature, it was still loud, but quieter than it was at this year's RSA or last year's Black Hat. So that was one thing. AI was still one of the big things, but it was a little quiet. And then, of course, CrowdStrike outage a couple weeks ago. That was the main thing people were talking about. I was very interested to see how and if CrowdStrike would sort of show up because, and I say this with no begrudgment. I don't envy their position at all. On the last time we sort of talked about this, we were I would say fairly empathetic to CrowdStrike's situation. But it was sort of a last minute decision. They decided they wouldn't go ahead with sort of some press interviews we lined up. I was like, I totally get it. A lot of things on your plate. But that still made me curious. How is CrowdStrike going to appear at the show? Because one thing that's very common with these booth shows is that either for marketing reasons or logistical, we need to keep our booth year after year reasons, it is very difficult for a large vendor who already has booth space to not show up at all. So I expected to see some CrowdStrike presence, and we did. Walking into the Mandalay Bay sort of convention center, there was one sort of white text on black screen saying like, we're committed to customers, sort of thing. Not an apology, but just sort of a, we're here for you.
Yep.
The backpacks that they try to give out with as you pick up your badges that had a CrowdStrike logo on it. But as far as I know, and I'm not saying this is literally the case, but I'm pretty sure those were the only two pieces of outside the conference CrowdStrike anything I saw. I'm guessing it would have been more if this didn't happen, but that was it. And
Hmm.
then go on to the show floor. CrowdStrike has their full booth. It references a threat report that they didn't really publicize that they were putting out, one of their annual threat reports that they usually release around Black Hat.
And usually
Um,
gets a lot of attention too. Yeah. Yeah. They
mhm.
usually, yeah, do a lot of briefings. And so,
Yep. So they decided to go quiet on that, and then just product related stuff. And to be honest, I don't know what I expected, but it was pretty chill there. I
mm,
mean, people were talking to CrowdStrike folk. I'm sure there were a lot of conversations that were about uh the outage, but I talked to someone who was attending a booth there, and that person was saying that of the conversations they were having, it was about 50-50 outage to other stuff, which who knows how accurate that is, but it wasn't like people were mad or
right.
anything.
Yeah.
2 weeks out, 99% plus of these Windows server systems, sensors, all that restored. Um, it was just it felt a little more lighthearted than that.
Mm,
And the thing I sort of felt personally, and the thing that I feel like others felt as well, who I brought it up to, was that I think CrowdStrike played Black Hat well.
mm.
Because if you've been to Black Hat, you know that CrowdStrike's booth is like right in the front row. As
It's
soon
pretty
as you
big.
walk in, it's one of the first three or four that you see.
Yep.
Um, if there was just a crater of a booth there, or just some signage but no attendees, that would have been really loud.
Right.
I think that the way they did it, here's our threat report. We're only going to keep product related stuff, but here's this little quiet thing on the outside as you're walking into the convention center where that sort of says, hey, we know this is sort of a big conversation topic this year. Here's our white text on black screen for you. I think CrowdStrike tried to play it humble, and I think they did a pretty good job, is I guess my long story short.
Yeah. And we should note that, you guys only attended Black Hat, but at DEF CON, DEF CON holds the Pony Awards, ponies, uh, you know, biggest vulnerabilities or best research or biggest uh, fail.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the biggest fail went to CrowdStrike for the botched update.
Mm-hmm.
The name of the award, most epic fail.
Yeah.
And one of their guys was there to accept it humbly and sort of take the heat, I guess. And although there wasn't heat from the crowd, it doesn't sound like it. It sounds like most everyone kind of gave them credit for showing up and facing the music. So,
Mm-hmm.
what'd you think of that?
I think I agree with that sentiment that it's noble of them to show up. I would also say, perhaps slightly more cynically, that they didn't really have a choice but to show up. Um,
Uh,
it looks way worse if they don't. I think if there was just we invited CrowdStrike, but they didn't agree to come. I think that looks bad. I think them communicating, hey, we screwed up, we're doing better, we're gonna do better, which it
yeah,
seems like, was it they got Santonis up there?
yeah, hmm,
Yep. Um, the idea of we're gonna do better and talking to the DEF CON audience,
hmm,
which is like that audience, it's not that they're the most influential, but they are the hearts and minds of a lot of this community.
yeah,
And to look them in the eyes and show up and sort of hold
yeah,
your hat in your hand, I think it's meaningful. And although there's a somewhat cynical take of they sort of had to do this anyway, I still think it's nice that they did. And
yeah.
that's my sort of opinion. What do you think?
I guess I go the other way on your second point there, that they had to do it. I'm kind of wondering if there were discussions internally especially with legal counsel, like, hey, we need to maintain a low profile. Don't do this because we don't want Delta or some other customer saying, hey, you admitted to an epic fail, or you were there kind of, accepting a joke award. And that's shows you don't take this seriously or whatever. These things can be misconstrued and intentionally misinterpreted a number of different ways. So I kind of, my initial read on that was, wow, I'm a little surprised that they did it, but I kind of agree that with you about, I think it was important for them to do it to face the music and face the DEF CON crowd and show up and not duck it, just duck the shows completely. So, credit to them, I guess, for showing up and getting out there and just being there. So let's turn to some of the sessions and some of the other stuff beyond the big themes. What stood out to you? Were there particular speakers or sessions or topics in some of those sessions that really stood out to you?
This is sort of a boring answer, but I was very surprised by the keynote this year. Not and it's not really a content thing, but
right.
The big keynote this year were three folks from international sort of national security agencies. You had the European Unions, you had the NCSC, and you had Jen Easterly, who's director of CISA. And they were just talking about election security. They seem pretty confident going into this year. UK's already held some elections. There's already been some EU relevant elections, and it seems like, yeah, people tried to attack, but we got a handle on things. So I guess it's nice for as much as you can trust the government, which isn't very much, but I do believe the idea that one, people attacked, and two, the election security machine is so polished to this point that they probably did have a pretty good handle on it. And to me, it was just the crowd that showed up for it, because normally it's at the convention auditorium upstairs. I guess pre-COVID it was in the Michelob Ultra Arena. Maybe it was a packed stadium. It was a completely packed stadium. Other than a few empty seats, but like it wasn't like the first 30% was full and then the rest of it wasn't.
Yeah.
So to me, the attendance was pretty surprising. And the attendance for something about election security was also surprising, because it's at 9 a.m.
Yeah.
A lot of people who were there probably didn't have to show up for it. We had to, but like a lot of these people didn't, which I think it was interesting to me to see how many people seem to care about this subject matter in general. So I guess that sort of stood out to me. The other thing that stood out to me was I did a couple pre-briefings for sessions about LLM powered threats and sorry, not LLM powered threat. Well, I guess that's kind of what I mean. It's sort of threat actors conducting cyber attacks by basically using the AI against itself, and the indirect prompt injection seems like it's picking up a lot of steam which all speaks to a larger idea of an increasing maturity in this space, both on the product side and threat side. Maybe the product side a little slower.
Yeah, so again, I wasn't at the show. I talked to some folks ahead of the show, and I know that Ariel did some work on some sessions, some stories involving AI and large language models, generative AI. And one of the things that she wrote about was there was a Veracode session about using coding assistants, these AI coding assistants, Copilot, or various other tools out there that basically help developers code. And one of the themes that I think came up in that session was at a high level, the concerns were basically number one, these tools aren't really intelligent. It's one of my big gripes with AI is that AI isn't actually intelligent. Kind of a problem, kind of a,
Hmm.
maybe selling a bill of false goods or whatever. Uh, but so if you have a code base or you're pulling from code bases that have existing vulnerabilities, the AI isn't necessarily going to recognize those vulnerabilities and is just going to replicate them. Just
Hmm.
doesn't seem like a great, thing. And then the other thing that it didn't really occur to me, but came up in the session that Ariel covered was that these coding assistants, and I've heard this before, but the effect of it didn't really click with me. These coding assistants, so many people are using them and they're pushing out code fast. And the code is just piling up on the app security guys who have to do the manual reviews of the code, if they're even doing the reviews, if they're even
Hmm.
scanning and fuzzing and doing all that stuff. And Chris, the speaker from Baracode, I think his concern was this stuff is just going to pile up and it's just creating more work. And these app security teams, if these organizations even have dedicated teams to do this stuff, are going to be so overworked because the speed to produce code has gotten like exponentially faster.
Hmm.
And then the third thing, this maybe wasn't the third thing in the session list, but the third thing that stood out to me and just hearing about this was, the poisoning, like like tricking the AI into, introducing flaws, introducing vulnerabilities, introducing weaknesses, introducing stuff that attackers could exploit and weaponize and use to get into mission critical apps, organizations, infrastructure, etc. Not great, not great.
Hmm.
So that gave me a bit of concern. Um, you had mentioned just sort of the vibe around AI. I do wonder, and maybe you have a better sense of this because you were at the show, if people are just kind of like, this is interesting technology, but it's not really like we're not really applying it right now, or it's not being applied, or it's not mature enough to be applied in a real like value add way. I don't know if you got a sense of that at the show.
I think people are all over the board. I mean, I saw
For
one
sure.
guy who was wearing one of those like goofy, what's it called, like the rabbit things,
Yep.
like the thing that's like basically an Android phone in a little square, and is supposed to be a virtual assistant, but it's no more advanced than like a Fitbit or something.
Yeah.
Um, so I saw so there's that spectrum. Um, but then I also talked to some folks who were pretty cynical about AI. I would say the most middle of the road take that I agreed with was the Trusted Sex CEO, Dave
Oh
Kennedy,
yeah.
who I spoke to. Um, and he was sort of the mind of AI really isn't there yet. He's not seeing a ton of use cases. Some really good ideas and basic implementations for how it can be applied to security, but it's not really there yet where I think people want it to be, or maybe he wants it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But with the caveat with security and code generation and all that stuff, he sees the potential for it to be really interesting and important.
Mm.
Because actually, I remember asking him a question. I'm like, is this cloud where it has a bit of a rocky start, but then becomes the biggest thing ever? Or do you see this being more like, AR, VR, where the technology gets billions of dollars funneled into it,
Mm-hmm.
and it does still have a place in the world, but it's a much smaller one than maybe people
Yeah.
hoped or thought going in. And I think he felt that there was the potential for it to become the former, as especially like quantum technology got more advanced over the
Hmm.
years and decades. Um he thought there was definitely a place for this kind of technology, but where it's at, he was maybe a little less bullish and a little more cynical. And I feel like I'm sort of in the same place. Not specifically quantum, that's
Yeah.
above my mind level, but but I guess I'm more of that mode of there's a lot of dumb, let's say, crypto bro adjacent use cases or
Yeah.
like discussion around AI,
Mhm.
but especially in the security space, efficiency related tasks, um,
Yeah.
it's easier to see some potential down the line.
Mhm.
I don't know. Are you sort of in the same?
Yeah, the bigger issue for me is just the speed with which we're accelerating, the deployment of these AI projects. I mean, everyone's doing it. I guess you'd be almost crazy not to do it.
Mhm.
But it's like the mobile app, boom. Everybody is doing this, and they're doing it. It's sort of as fast as they can to try to take advantage of this. They want a first mover advantage, whether they're a vendor or they're an adoptee, and security's just kind of been thrown out the window. Not
Mhm.
thrown out the window totally. That may be unfair, but Ariel did a session. She spoke with the Wiz guys. They had a session about how they were able to break into different code platform. I'm sorry, AI provider platforms, and everyone uses these platforms. Maybe not everyone, but Hugging Face, Replicate, SAP AI Core. These guys found ways to just basically use their own legitimate accounts to kind of like break out of the containers and get
Mhm.
into other people's instances and get their training data, their models, figure out ways to run code from those instances and move laterally across the entire platform and just get all types of confidential data, sensitive data, secrets. Like, we got to do a better job. I understand people want to move fast, and I understand, you don't want to be a techno pessimist these days, but I just feel like we're kind of making the same mistakes that we did with mobile apps, and to maybe a lesser degree cloud, because security wasn't top of mind back then. But just moving at a pace and not securing this stuff in a way that is going to protect organizations and the providers themselves from like major exposure. So we'll see. We'll see what
Mhm.
happens. Um, you had mentioned cloud security. I want to mention a session that I was able to sort of get a preview of and discuss it
Sure.
uh, ahead of the show since I was not there. But Aqua Security had a really good session, some research about cloud vulnerabilities within AWS that I thought it spoke to a number of, I guess, issues and trends, let's say, in the InfoSec space. And what they found was they were playing around with different types of AWS services, and they discovered that like some of these services, when you launch them in different regions for the first time, they'll kind of just automatically spin up an S3 bucket for you. It's like, here's an S3 bucket to store your data for CodeStar or CloudFormation or Service Catalog. And what they found was that these buckets were automatically named by AWS based on like your AWS ID, your account ID. Sometimes they were given just 12 alphanumeric character, unique IDs, but a lot of times they were sort of based on the account ID. And that created a situation where these basically like these shadow resources that some customers didn't know were being created on their behalf were just being spun up. And they found a way sort of to like squat on these resources, like create the resource with the name before it actually was created by AWS. So like they would
Wow.
go and they'd figure out a name, like based on the account ID of a specific customer. They'd say, oh, they have a cloud formation resource, a service over in the East region. Well, if they launch one in the West version based on their ID, this is what the name is going to be. So we're going to create one with a name, with this name, and hopefully they will get fooled into thinking that this is their bucket when in fact it's ours. And you could configure the settings so that it would make it look like it was the customer's bucket and not, the threat actors. And so it was interesting research because we do so much in the cloud, and the cloud's gotten so big and so complex. And there's all these little things that we're doing on behalf of customers, but that can be taken advantage of by attackers and researchers. And AWS in this case, like they got the research from Aqua. They verified that it was, these vulnerabilities existed in X number of services. I think Aqua found a couple others. So they ended up patching 5 of the 6 because CodeStar was deprecated. So it's no longer in use. You can't create new resources for it. But it was just one of those things. It's like, man, cloud is so big. It's so complex. We moved to cloud to kind of make things easier because on-premise stuff was like managing your own on-premise network was getting so complicated and so difficult to defend. And now we're not in the same position with cloud, but we're in a different position where the complexity and all the moving parts, like it's not just like a simple equation where you just flip on a cloud service and like you're up and running and everything's fine. There's all these different configurations and settings and potential weaknesses that an attacker can exploit, and it makes me a little concerned going forward, just because I felt like we were moving to a good place with cloud security, and now how much research have we gotten in the last 2-3 years post COVID, where whether it's a CrowdStrike or Trend Micro or Sophos or whoever, the bad guys are going after cloud services more.
Yep,
That's where the goods are. So, I think we got to like kind of react accordingly to that and just sort of pay attention to where these guys are going and be a little bit more diligent about when we build new services or build new offerings, just do it from the mind of a threat actor and from the point of view that like, hey, this could be abused or taken advantage of by, especially a nation state guy. I mean, this is the whole thing with Microsoft and Midnight Blizzard. It's like, please stop. I mean, the Cyber Safety Review Board is like, please stop introducing new things. Please secure your old things. I think especially in the cloud, they said. I may be wrong about that. So that's something that for me and my small contribution to the Black Hat coverage that I thought was pretty interesting. It was one of those sessions that I saw early on in the agenda where I was like, that's one I want to find out more about and hopefully talk to the speakers about. So that was a good one. Any other, I guess, closing thoughts or
I guess the only thing I would say is CrowdStrike stuff will come and go. That's a this year story. Hopefully we don't see anything like this again, and hopefully everyone learns the right lessons. Who knows if that'll happen. But this CrowdStrike story will come and go. But since the beginning of 2023, RSA 2023, AI has been the focus of any given show we've attended. Not just us, but like a lot of our non-security colleagues have seen AI focused at sort of the coverage they're making as well. So the only thing I really have to say here is I'm looking forward to seeing how the AI train keeps rolling, whether that's because the technology is getting better or because and I would call this unlikely, it all goes down in flames. I think it's going to be an interesting story regardless.
Yeah.
But that's sort of what I'm always interested to see. And you know what actually I'm also interested to see is what folks pay attention to next when they start to get tired of AI, or if as Goldman Sachs says, people are less interested in investing in it because the technology is not there. I mean, like all of us, when we get a new electronic or we see a new electronic that we need to buy, need to have, the security industry is going to have the next new shiny toy that they want to chase to get either a technical or fiscal return from. So I'm
Yeah.
very interested and excited to see what that is.
Yeah. Good point.
I don't know. How about you?
You know, I'm the same. I'm sort of, I've been a little bit of an AI pessimist, so I'm kind of wondering if what the what the next turn is here. If we're gonna start to see some we've been pre-briefed on some stuff. Like I know there's something coming out this week related to AI coding assistants, which I probably am able to talk about, but I'll just save it for the coverage when it goes live. It'd be interesting to see what happens, especially with the coding stuff, the coding assistance, if it's really helping, and what type of security add-ons and tools, I guess, for lack of a better term, are provided to help developers actually find vulnerabilities, eliminate vulnerabilities, get rid of them, not replicate bad code. That's just a huge concern amongst developers and security researchers right now. So, fingers crossed. I mean, I'm a little bit of an AI pessimist, but I do think there's some potential for this stuff to start taking hold and really helping folks in a tangible way. And just hope we see it soon. Sure. Hope we get like real results soon. So, but we can leave it there. Black Hat 2024 in the books. Alex, thank you for going. Thank you for braving the dry heat of Las Vegas. Really appreciate it.
Anytime.
And thank you to the readers and listeners of Tech Target and the Risk and Repeat podcast. I'm Rob Wright, and we'll see you next time.